Today on Blinded Voices, we discuss the danger of redefining history. This is Loren.
I'm Ian.
And I'm Greg.
Well, with all the news that's been going on lately, we're finding things getting redefined left and right. And, from everything from political terms being redefined and party switches that supposedly happened, it's really hard to even have a conversation with people that don't even know real history.
Well, this goes back to a very recent podcast of the challenge that we have on agreeing. In fact, if you go back and listen, we were with Seth Liebson, and he spoke to the fact that we don't even agree on very common beliefs. The fact that a table is a table. And so as long as that is in play, it's ripe for redefining.
It's interesting, the whole political side of redefining history, because there's the term "to the victor go the spoils," and the victor writes the history. I think it's been taken beyond the battle, from the physical war battle, to now really a case of who the political winner is starts to redefine history. And that becomes really scary because that brings it down levels.
Well, it's not even the winner politically, it's just whoever's got the loudest voice nowadays. So a perfect example, and we were kind of talking about this before, is like I see people argue about left, right, oh, you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, whatever it is. Well, if you look at just the term fascist, the left likes to paint that as that's a far-right extremist. Technically, if you look at the guy that invented the whole term fascist, and it was Mussolini, screaming Marxist, and just that's a far, far left ideology, but because we listen to a group of people that decide to scream the loudest, now they're right. All of a sudden, they've redefined the language, and in fact, they start using Wikipedia as their source. And I think it was early 2000s. You can look at pre 2005 dictionaries will say fascist, far left. Now it says far right. They've gotten so far to
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, they've changed the definition.
Well, and the idea that, and you hit the nail on the head with regard to screaming the loudest, is that we've lost the art of conversation.
Right.
And so if we can't sit down and agree to disagree, but still move forward the conversation, then it's a matter of, it's an arm wrestle every time I see you.
Right. Well, just like our one, the podcast about being right all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to be correct in their beliefs, and so you scream louder and you ignore the other person's speech and just keep talking.
See, and with redefining history, you have a situation where it's never done, and not done in a way that doesn't hurt somebody else. It seems to be a case it's being done for a negative purpose by a group. Because obviously one person can't redefine it, because you need agreement across a group to redefine something like that. But you look back on history when even the Nazis, the way they were redefining the Jewish role within Germany. Or you go back with the Russians redefining the relationship they had with members of their society, even with the Ukrainians. Mm. And then it always ends bad. It always does. So anytime I see that happening, my spidey sense of, oh shit, this could go wrong in a bad way quickly, perks up.
Well, and it's amazing how many people don't understand history. They don't. Our society, or you talk to your kids, I'm sure you've probably had a conversation with them and start talking about something in history, and they're like, history's boring, I don't want to learn about that. But that's how you learn. There's a lot to be learned from past mistakes. That's how you get better.
Well, remember history going back even to, caveman times, or even early biblical times. The idea was that you were passing down important stories and important information to further society, and to build a better society, or just to maintain. but their stories had to be accurate. And it's even interesting that when they've found multiple different scrolls on teachings of Old Testament thing, it's amazing how similar they are. It's not like they're massively different. So that story was dictated, and I think when you hear the word the scribes, a scribe had to be someone who could write accurately. And then you even go back into times when people couldn't read and write, but they would be taught things and they would have to repeat them accurately as part of that lesson. So it wasn't redefining history, it was like enforcing the correct story of what happened so it could be passed down generation over generation.
I'm visualizing, as you're explaining this, Ian, I'm visualizing cave drawings. And I don't ever remember seeing cave drawings where something's scratched out.
Right, that's a good point. Well, other than someone doing it 3,000 years later or 4,000 years later. With
sure.
Bob was it here?
But
H on it.
At that point in time, for however long that cave drawing was valid, I've never seen one. I'm not a researcher of cave drawings, but I've never seen one that looks to be like it was revised.
Yeah.
And it was critical information to sustain life.
It was then back then, yeah. Like especially I looked at the ones when I was in Australia, and it was talking about what food was in the area.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like what they used to hunt and what they used to eat.
What animals to stay away from.
Right.
Yeah.
All those sort of things. And even if you go back to the Egyptian hieroglyphics, the same thing as well. Yeah.
So we have a revisionist mindset. Society has a revisionist mindset, and you wonder what society will look like in 200 years. Will we just be this milkshake of history? Just pour it out and it's a blob. There's no significance to it. There's no framework.
It's not important if it's not true, because it's a lie, right? So ultimately that falls apart anyway. I think what you've seen happening over here with trying to redefine the founding of America, I never ever thought of the founding of America as some fairy tale. Like, yes, it came with brutality, yes, it came with injustice, yes, it came with... But so what? There hasn't been a nation in the world that hasn't had that happen, because you're dealing with fallible people who are in imperfect times trying to make the best of what they had. And someone ends up suffering. No, that's not fair, but life isn't fair. Not that, again, that justifies people suffering, but you can't then try and redefine it as something that was even worse than it was.
Well, trying to redefine it with today's morals and thoughts overlaid against something that happened 300 or 400 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, it's never going to be the same. We have a different moral code than they did 100 years ago, 200 years. Like, it changes constantly, and hopefully we're going into the right direction. We can't look at history through today's lens, because it would always look horrible.
See, yeah, and I think about like a situation where that guy up in Idaho who is on trial for killing those, I think, 5 kids in that house. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if in years to come, and let's say presume that he's actually guilty, or even Jeffrey Dahmer, whatever, that you would end up with a family that would redefine their history and go, well, Jeffrey wasn't that bad a guy. And then a few generations after, well, Jeffrey was actually a really good community guy. He had a lot of friends in the community. He ate them.
Yeah, right.
Well,
right.
It's already happened. The revisionists have already looked at, like, Che Guevara, right?
Che Guevara is a huge one. Yeah.
You can't go into a campus anywhere in the United States where people are like, oh yeah, this guy, they're wearing shirts with his likeness on it. And I've seen even there's cafes on, I think, Berkeley's campus that has a Guevara.
Was he the butcher of El Salvador or something?
He wasn't a nice guy.
Not at all. Yeah, exactly.
He murdered people, but people in the activist realm think that he's a hero because
and he didn't live the liberal lifestyle.
No.
That the people that align with those sets of values that wear those T-shirts define.
Right. That's 100% true. Right.
It's much like the survival rate of someone that's, when we talked earlier about Israel and Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they redefine history. Hamas, days after it happened, are redefining it.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's the other week I went on a subreddit called Israel War, and they have videos of the people being killed. They have videos from the morgues and things like that. But the ones of people being killed, it's you have in your head an idea of what that looks like. When you actually see it, people being hunted down and shot and all that, it's kind of crazy. And it sort of leaves you, but they're redefining that straight away. Oh, that never happened. We never did that to women.
Right.
There's a video of it there. You hung this person up by their feet after you burnt them alive. You are listening to Bonded Voices. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast service or on the web at www.bondedvoices.com. Thank you to all our sponsors, and now back to the show. So think of it like this, right? You look at North Korea, they redefine history all the time. China redefines history. Russia redefines history. Ukraine redefines history. Is there a good example of where they've redefined history? Like an example of a good organization or a good country that's redefined history?
I can't think of one.
Yeah, either can I. I mean, the reason why they redefine it is they're usually trying to hide something.
I just heard a bunch of our listeners screaming at the podcast that America's redefining history. Yeah, they are, but they haven't fully done it yet. They're on the way to doing it. And if they do it, it won't end up good. And America will not be a better place for redefining history. Like, we need to tell the stories, warts and all, of slavery, oppression, all the bad stuff and all the good stuff, and put it in context and explain it correctly. Like, there's no utopia on earth, but we can't redefine it to all of a sudden come up with a fantasy land that really doesn't exist.
Well, I'm thinking through, how does that help it? So for those of us that have families, we know that our children are going to endure challenges, and we want to hope that they've been risen in such a manner that they will be able to endure those challenges and be successful on the other side of whatever that challenge is. But part of the revisionist idea of the challenge never exists. Let's rewrite slavery, for example. This massive atrocity that occurred, that existed. We remove all of this history. How does that help get through the challenge? I would much rather have students in the classroom thinking, oh my gosh, at some point, the gravity of all of that, to understand the situation. And by rewriting or revising history, we're robbing from the future.
So what is the end goal, like you said, what's the end goal of the revision? Is there some type of class structure that is granted based on, I mean, right now in the country there seems to be a revisionist to where everyone wants to have their own victimhood, right? So by rewriting history and making it look like I had a worse history than you, I get social credit score that's higher.
Well, think of an example, right, of someone who would automatically want to rewrite history. Would be the today's German population, right? Over the concentration camps, they have Aus wird das wir vergessen, which means lest we forget. With the idea being that they're never allowed to tear down those gas chambers and those concentration camps. They're there as a memory, so it can never happen again. But they would love to, because I speak with Germans during the business day, and it's that old Monty Python thing. You don't want to bring up the war, but at the same time, yeah, you don't want to bring up the war. But that history is awful.
Right.
And those people had grandparents who were probably part of that awful. And there wasn't, like we talked about, that everyone in Gaza pretty much voted for Hamas, or at least another terrorist organization. Everybody in Germany was on board with the motherland. The ones that weren't, like Bonhoeffer and people like that, their story's been told, but they were an extreme minority. Everyone else was in the factories, building the bombs, building the missiles, being part of the war machine. Knowing pretty much what was going on, even though some of them claimed they didn't. They knew what was going on. Even the British government said, we knew what was going on with the concentration camps, that sort of thing. So people knew. So they'd want to rewrite their history. But to your... So revise... I mean, not revise, Loren. Yeah, revise your history question. Repeat your question one more time, because I had a corollary off that thought with Germany.
For what's the purpose of it? What do you gain?
So the purpose. Thank you. The purpose being that I think it's to placate emotion and change the path going forward. That we weren't that. Now, what's interesting is you think the revisionist history people on the left in America who were trying to talk about slavery, and it's awful, right? But the way they're trying to make out the people of the time, like Jefferson, and people who had slaves or probably had slaves, and the fact that they must have been evil people. I don't think you can rewrite it. They are what they were.
Again, it's going back. You can't overlay our morals,
right? And you can't overlay presumed intent and everything else over that. It just is what it is. They at the time, worldwide, it wasn't like this was something just going on in America anyway.
Well, again, that's revisionist history. There's a lot of people that don't understand the world impact of slavery, and that it went on long after slavery ended in the United States. Slavery is still going on today.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's slowed down quite a bit, but there's just one view of history, in that it was the United States was the impetus of all slavery. And when you talk to people and they find out that, wait, what? It started someplace else and other people were doing it?
Right.
And only 10% or something like that came to the United States? What are you talking about? That's not what I was taught. So there is a weird... there's a weird psychology going in there. What are the people trying to gain by altering history to make people victims?
And see, going back to my earlier statement about the biblical stuff, when you've got the Jews, when they were in Egypt, became the slaves. The slaves built the pyramids. Slaves from probably all over Africa and from what was Israel back in the day, or God's given Israel. And they were all slaves. And there were slaves probably before that. There were slaves after that. And all around the world. And again, it doesn't make it... you have to sort of take that history and talk to it exactly what it was. It was wrong. It was something that shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. And not everyone who was involved in it was, the evilest of evil people. And in the same way, we did say that that everyone in Germany was part of the motherland, apart from a few people. But there were definitely different degrees of people's involvement. If you worked at the concentration camp, that's a little different than just working in a ball bearing factory.
Sure.
Right. Definitely.
Well, what's the underlying fear of letting people learn for themselves?
That's a really good question. Why is the truth being hidden?
Because they don't believe it's the truth. Because they in their heads believe that it was something much worse and that story isn't being told.
But what value does the person that's promoting the story? I can understand in the Nazis and the Germany revising history, because that's hiding history to make themselves look better.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of revisionist history that goes the other way, where it's like, well, I'm a bigger victim.
So therefore, you're the bigger oppressor, and therefore you owe me. So there's that side of it, right? And you're looking at this whole thing with reparations, and most of the people who they had in this, I think they were doing something in Oakland, and most of the people didn't even qualify. They weren't even here. They didn't even come from this part. And then they found a few people. I think they just found out. Who was it? Famous. He was either black politician or actor. They found that he was actually a descendant of slave owners. So it's like, should he be paying?
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing about it. I think there's always an intent built in around a large push to revise history. And I would even go as far as saying, if Jeffrey Dahmer's family 50 years from now were trying to change the perception of Jeffrey Dahmer, I don't think they're doing it with any good intent in mind whatsoever.
Well, I would imagine it would be to lessen the negative impact of the last name.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what takeaways do we have on this one for folks when they're actually having those conversations around revisionist history? Is there something people can have a good conversation with friends in a coffee shop about this topic when it comes up? Because it seems to be like, the Washington Redskins, again, revisionist history, they went back and they said, this was an abuse of Native American Indians, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden, the origin of the use of Indian Joe is now gaining massive support in tribal communities. Because they're like, we've lost an identity that was out there that held up Native American culture, even though within a football team, but it still held it up.
Right. Well, same with the Cleveland Indians. They had...
Right. Yeah.
So what I take from that is who's representing and who has the voice to make that change. Because someone spoke at some point in some meeting saying, we believe that the Native Americans don't like the term Redskins anymore.
No, I actually don't think it was that. I actually think it was this whole idea of that came out of this, you can't use Native American people that way. I think I've told you the story before when I was in Australia and we went into the outback to visit this Aboriginal tribe, and there was someone who was very left-wing with us from America, and when they saw them in jeans, they were kind of pissed off that they were wearing jeans and not like camel skin, dancing around.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They were kind of like, they're like, this would never have happened if the white man would have got involved in this country. They'd still be dancing around the fire. And I'm like, how the hell do you know they dance around the fire? It's like, it's that there's a thread in people that, again, they've imagined what history was like, they've seen stories, and now they wanted to continue that. And I think in the same way that they're so pissed off with what happened to the Native American Indians when this country was founded, they thought that was such an injustice, that they still think the injustice is being perpetrated and being continued by having Indian Joe on the Redskin helmet. and the name be the Redskins. So I think probably in their mind, they're like, I'm doing a better thing for society by taking this down and just making Native Americans even less visible in our society, which we know what happens when you become less visible in the society. You eventually disappear.
Right.
So that, for me, that's my takeaway. Is if you're out there listening and you've got friends in a coffee shop and this conversation comes up, talk about it. Agree to disagree, but have that conversation where you can understand the topic a little more. And if you get stuck on something, look it up.
Definitely. That would be my takeaway.
Cautious on where you look it up. But
just not Wikipedia. Right?
Sure.
Exactly.
Well, and I think my takeaway from this is going back to some of the historical writings Ian talked about. We talked about cave drawings. The idea of conversation and passing down that information from generation to generation. Have a conversation with your kids. Have a conversation with another generation. I've always enjoyed conversations with the next generation older than us. I have for years liked the music of that generation, the cars, the whole experience of that, and I've learned a lot from just sitting around and listening to conversation. So my takeaway is ask questions, have the conversation, relive what you understand, and ask others.
So for me, the takeaway would be, read a book here and there, learn history. I mean, history's out there to learn and to pass on to others. If you don't take the time to learn history, it's going to be forgotten.
You still have a library card?
I do not.
They're free.
Actually, you know what? I do actually have a library card. I don't use a library, but I have a library card.
Check out a book.
So until next time, I'm Ian.
I'm Greg.
This is Loren.
Thanks for joining us on Bonded Voices, and we'll see you again.